Yeah, welcome everyone to the Flux Dev meeting. Today is Wednesday, the 28th of April. I'm just checking the agenda doc if we have any. Oh, we have a bunch of action items. Okay, let's go through them. There's one action for Stefan to open an image automation discussion. That's not very specific. Do you still know what it was about?
Yeah, I opened an RFC. I've created an RFC on the for the image automation controller, so people can make use of policies across namespaces. And yeah, I can give you the link to the RFC.
Cool.
Here is the link if you want to add it to the doc.
Yeah, super.
Yeah, no one said anything.
Okay.
Well, except for the people that want this feature. Like users definitely need it, are needing this, but no Flux maintainer said anything. So
I added a note. Other people should comment. Cool. Thanks a lot for looking into this. Scott had an action update migration table with image automation intermediate step, link to discussion. Not quite sure if this is done.
That wasn't done.
Okay.
And we have to, with the new website, we have to rethink all our tables because they look, you can't read what's in there. I mean, I can. Also, the API spec tables look kind of bad compared to what we had in MK docs. So for the migration table, the idea was in MK docs we could disable the sidebar, but here is not an option. Or maybe it is, I don't know how to do it. But unless we disable the right-hand side sidebar and style the table. So that's one option. Another option would be to drop the table altogether and rethink how we present.
No, I don't think that's necessary. I think we can, this can be done. I would need help with the styling. You know, I'm not a CSS wizard. It takes me ages to get something done, but not showing the sidebar for select pages is certainly possible. Yeah, I'll file an issue for this. Okay, yeah, sorry. It's a bit hard finding issues, taking notes, and running this. Okay, there was an action for Stacy. She's not here. And then there was an action write docs on how to use pull requests with image automation.
Yes, the pull request is open. It's
yeah,
short and sweet.
The
only thing there is to say about it really is that the GitHub action we were linking to before isn't really good for this job, so I picked a different one. The create pull request action expects you to make some changes that it will commit and then create a pull request from. So I just picked a different action that doesn't expect to make a commit just work with an existing branch. And it works pretty well.
Super. Thank
Great.
you.
I'm going to approve it now so we can merge and then add it to the blog post.
Super.
The black blog post meaning the monthly blog post, or was it a separate one that was being planned?
No, I think it's just going to go. I'll come up with something, paragraph shortened version of something from the article, and
Yeah.
give you
So
Daniel.
one second. In the blog post where we announce the Flux releases,
Yeah.
We can have a section that talks about image automation. Right. We need to say, hey, we've promoted the image automation API from Alpha 1 to Alpha 2, give a link to the discussion that I've created where people have a guide on how to migrate, or copy paste the whole thing from discussions inside the blog post. I don't know, it's up to you, Daniel, how you want to do it, or I don't know, take a phrase or two from that discussion and then link it. Then link to the image automation guide that was updated, and also link to the GitHub Action use case. So we can have like a section about image automation, encourage people to use it, tell them we've upgraded. So for the early adopters, there is some pain around it because you have to modify the YAMLs in your Git repo after you upgrade. And finally, link to the two guides that we have.
Cool, I made a note. Okay. Okay, someone feedback to GitHub ability to convert discussion to issue would help. Okay, sure if this has happened. I guess I'll copy it over. There's another one for Jordan. He's also not here. Yeah, okay, I'll copy these back so we can.
So the link to the discussion around image automation upgrades is I've pasted in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Super. Okay. Okay, moving on. Here's a repeating agenda item around image update automation. Michael is not here. Does anyone else have an update? Anything we should put into the notes?
No updates since last meeting. The is the same what we discussed. V1 alpha 2 APIs and so on. Anyway, more people are testing this. Someone found the other day a bug around regex validation, and Relu is going to fix the bug, and will probably, I don't know, maybe not next week because most of us are on vacation, but the week after we'll do a release with the bug fix.
Okay, I have a quick update. So the Flux CDIO website now has the documentation for Flux 2. This was a long, long time in the making. It's still rough around the edges in a couple of places, but we're working on it. So I think, yeah, today or in the next days, we're going to remove the documentation in the Flux 2 repository. So please don't make any changes there. Make them in the website repository now.
Yeah, so there were 7 pull requests open for docs in Flux 2. I've closed them all, so Alison and others who opened those pull requests, please do them again for the website. We couldn't merge those because the docs were out of sync and it was way too painful to figure out how to port everything over again to website. I think it's best to continue those there. No pull request that I closed was in a mergeable state. There were other conflicts or comments, or CI was failing because there weren't signed commits and so on. So there was nothing we could do about them. But I was surprised there were so many pull requests around docs.
Do you want me to transfer the open area docs issues from Flux 2 to the website repository?
Yes, please. If we have anything left, let's move them.
It's a couple. It's a handful, maybe.
Great.
Cool. All right. Another small bit from my end. I'm doing the monthly blog post. I will try to finish it today and then get it out maybe tomorrow. So if you have anything you urgently want to add, like anything where you need help or anything you want to call out, please add a paragraph. I added the link to the draft to the agenda. And then you have an agenda item.
I do. Where are we at? Oh, that's the same one. We already talked about it.
Oh, cool. Super. In that case, Philip.
Yeah,
yours.
so I thought, I'll just turn on the camera. So I thought now when Hida's here, we can take the discussion again regarding source composition. I think Relu had some comments there which were good. I'm going to try to get that done today. I'm working also on the Helm operator CRD fixes. Yeah, I'm not too sure. I understand your comments here about like artifacts and how they will be included in the status fields.
What comment exactly? Did I comment on anything on the
I
issue?
think it was in Slack. I think it just was in Slack and passing you said some comment there about the way
so
we're artifacts.
I can give a rough outline of my concerns mainly. One of the things I don't like about the design is the fact that the include happens per source guide. So it means that if you want to extend includes to any other source type, however, we need to basically include those fields in the custom resource and then redo all the logic for the specific type we're dealing with. Which isn't a really clever solution in my opinion, especially because the artifacts are kind of an object. They are a reference to something on storage, but they can, and at the moment they're recorded in the status object, but they could also be separate custom resources.
The issue with using or kind of building a identical or some generic solution is that the different source types have different ways of detecting change.
Yeah, but you would check for new artifacts being pushed to the cluster. So you would, for example, watch the artifacts with an owner reference of some Git repository, and then whenever a new artifact pops up, your combined artifact bundle basically retriggers all the logic and includes a new artifact in the combined resource.
So the idea is just to break out artifacts into a separate.
Into something
Brief.
that's able to stand on its own,
Yeah.
so that you don't have the problem of adding a lot of stuff into the status. Another thing, I don't know, I'm not sure how your design works together with, for example, image update automation. If one refers to a Git repository that has a combined set of artifacts, basically, how does the image update automation know what file belongs to what Git repository, basically?
So you have to, one second, you have to refer to the Git repo that contains the manifest.
Yeah, but would that make it kind of tricky? Because one Git repository does have includes, but the other one has the real source of truth, basically. But there is no way to distinguish if you're referring to the right Git repository and if the Git repository you're referring to has the manifest themselves or is including them. While with with a dedicated custom resource type, you could either say, oh, I have an artifact bundle and I now need to figure out what pod belongs to what Git repository, or you can simply say, oh, no, we don't accept automation on artifact bundles, and you need to report to the Git repository directly, which is included in the artifact bundle, but is also a separate unit on its own, which is a lot easier to configure, in my opinion, than having to figure out if a Git repository contains includes, or you get the product. You see the problem?
Yeah, well, I don't see that as an issue. I mean, whoever creates the includes will set up the image automation policy accordingly, right?
Yeah, but I think it can be configured indeed, but I think having added boundaries by creating designed objects to do certain stuff is a lot easier, both from an architectural point of view, but also from a user's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, the bundle idea, if we follow that, we should redo our whole APIs, right?
Well, we
For
should
example,
redo most of the source controller, yes. Another thing.
No, I mean, it affects everything. We should drop the depends on, because depends on and includes are in the same style of API. So we shouldn't have depends on anymore, drop everything, create a bundled customization where you list all the customizations in a particular order, and that's the dependencies for Helm releases as well, bundled, I don't know, Helm release, or I don't know, umbrella Helm release, whatever. I mean, if we are going to introduce this type of lists, like Kubernetes calls them lists, where you put together multiple objects of the same type, then we should come up with a V2 API for the whole Flux thing. I'm not against the bundle idea, but I think it doesn't fit at all with what we are doing today in our APIs, with depends on and everything else.
I don't see why depends on would be a blocker. Depends on basically simply checks if the resource type you're referring to is in a ready state, and then says, hey, you can move forward. But I don't see how a bundle would block that. I mean, you can refer to something that's within a bundle and then check for the status of that specific resource before doing the next thing.
But the bundle should depend on other bundles and so on, right? I mean, it changes.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah. I don't know. I see also the reason I also like the fact to create a specific object for an artifact is because it would maybe solve some issues around staging environments or whatever. Having a set of changes you want to say, you have a Git repository and you say that you want to have an artifact for the last 10 commits. You could then you could get 10 artifacts in your cluster, which wouldn't be garbage collected. And you could then basically automate something on top of it to say like, hey, for all the artifacts that have this owner reference, do something. For example, spin up an application or whatever. It would give you a lot of options we don't have today, because we only have a single artifact right now. And whenever that changes, we have a new artifact. And it doesn't allow you, for example, to say like create artifacts for, well, what I just said, for the last 10 commits or for a range of branches. So I see a lot of plus sides from doing this, and a lot of things, for example, to make automation around pull requests easier, etc., etc. But I do agree that it's a heavy change to the API. And
what effects would it have on other controllers, the rest of the ecosystem?
I mean, it changes everything.
Yeah,
it changes everything in a way that you need to receive the artifacts in a different way. But automation-wise, for all the controllers, once they have the artifact in the new way that we would create, then they can continue with what they were doing before.
Yes,
it does create some new questions, though. For example, indeed, if the readiness status on the artifact should be the counting factor, or if it's the Git repository. So it does create a whole new list of questions, basically.
It adds, I don't know, X2 complexity to everything we do. Because right now, Flux is super simple. You have an object, and that object state is immutable. You don't have versions of it. You don't have nothing. If you refer to a source, it has or it doesn't have an artifact. And if it has the artifact, that's the last possible artifact that could be fetched. Now, if we add versions to it, if we add bundles on top of different sources, then we should really come up with a different new API for Flux. That could, I don't know, push GA 1 year to here further. I'm not for these kind of changes. I'm more for dropping the inclusion altogether if you don't agree with that. But changing the APIs at this moment feels too early. I mean, people just got used to that. We are not GA yet, and
yeah,
that's my opinion.
I from a migration perspective, it's like I see your point, but it's like if we go with the included artifacts and the status fields, kind of look at how we can make it simpler to deal with multiple different resource types. So if you want to include buckets into Git repositories or whatever. If we a year from now say, okay, let's migrate to this other idea and change the API. Like, what would there be anything stopping us? We would still have to have a set amount of time where we still have to write to the status field because we have to have some sort of migration between the two versions, right? We can't just like drop one way of doing it and go to another.
No, how I see it is we introduce these top level objects, bundles or whatever they are.
Yeah.
I imagine like many people want a bundle like something that bundles together the source, multiple sources and multiple reconciliations. So you can define in a single object sources, customizations, Helm releases, and all together make, I don't know, an environment, an app, a bunch of microservices that mean something, a product, and so on, maybe a tenant, whatever. And when we introduce these top level APIs, that will be V2 of the Flux APIs. And like with Kubernetes, we'll either have some, I don't know, webhooks or something like that prepare the old API versions and have a translation, or we just tell people you have to choose between the V1 APIs or the V2 APIs. We'll support V1 APIs for 1 year, and after 1 year, we'll replace them with V2 or whatever. This happens with the horizontal pod autoscaler, right?
So moving forward from this, then, is it like, yeah, this is bad, so bad that we just should not implement the inclusion, or is this something that, like, yeah, we can live with?
I would restrict even more what it does today. For example, you've chose the type that can refer to sources in other namespaces.
Yeah.
I would drop that. I would say a Git repo can only include other Git repos in the same namespace. So we don't affect multi-tenancy, because this is source controller cannot do impersonation. It's not a reconciler. So if source controller can reference other sources in other namespaces, then we have to add impersonation to it and all of that. So to avoid it and still let people do things that they were doing with Flux V1, and where everything is declared in the same repo, so to say. That means the same namespace, and we make this feature only about Git repos as a better alternative to submodules. You cannot add an S3 bucket as a Git submodule, right? So I think it's out of the scope of the Git repository includes, and we should definitely take on the bundles idea and, I don't know, write a bunch of proposals of how these top level objects could look like in the future, because I think there is a lot of potential of simplifying the tenant idea or the app idea or the environment idea for people being able to declare everything in a single custom resource, sources, multiple reconciliations, depends on relationship, inline there, and so on.
Yeah, my last kind of question there was, I raised the whole point of multi-tenancy and inclusions, that you have to, like, basically define your Git repository twice if you're running multi-tenancy now. And that's kind of just like, it's a reality of the situation, really, that we should just document and
Yeah,
with.
but there are different personas. You don't you declare it twice in the cluster, but there are different people that are declaring it. The cluster admins, which is one team, is declaring the main Git repo that defines the tenant. Then the tenant can define his repo to include other repos. But I don't see them as a conflict, because there are different owners, if you want.
Yeah,
Of course,
that's like kind of the...
Let's say the tenants and the cluster admins are from the same organization, so the tenant can actually open a pull request on the cluster fleet repo. Then they could choose that way and open a pull request. Hey, I want to include all these other things here because I want to customize them or whatever, and that could go through a pull request. But for, let's say, true multi-tenancy, where they cannot talk to each other, they cannot see their repos, I think it's fine to declare it. Also, if you as a tenant want to do Semver releases and you want to say, hey, I want to deploy only Semver tags to my production cluster, you'll have to redeclare your repo, right? And say, instead of ref a branch, you have to say ref Semver. Or even if you want to switch to a different branch or have multiple branches go to different clusters, you have to declare for each branch a source, right? So that's where the bundling idea that Hida had could help a lot, because you could think about bundling sources. Maybe you use the same repo, but the bundle defines different branches or a branch and a Semver that go to different clusters, right? And you'll bundle that in a single object. And when you look at that object, is your application that, okay, dev goes to this cluster from this branch, staging goes to this cluster from this branch, and production goes to this cluster from a Semver list, right? So it's like What's your opinion, Hide? How we should proceed with the current includes thing?
Well, I think we need a solution sooner than later. Given the bundles ID together with the whole artifact thing is, well, too much work to take on now, and probably going to take some time. We should probably introduce the PRs proposed by you right now, Philip. But what I would like to see is that we set boundaries, real strict boundaries, so that the feature itself will not expand any further than just doing includes and your files there basically, and that's it. We should even probably document that we will not support cross sources for now, just as you mentioned. I'm not even sure if you want to extend it to buckets or any other source type. Only tie it to Git repositories, and then probably document that we have discussed other design options, but for now it's not feasible to get them ready in a short period of time, but that we're looking into, well, more advanced resource types to solve the solution in a different way, which would include support for other source types and more advanced compositions of artifacts, basically. And I also think that to get to artifact bundles, we don't need artifacts to be a separate object type. We can also start with just creating artifact bundles based on the current state of the listed sources, right?
Yeah, and create custom resources, read-only custom or immutable custom resources at every time the artifact changes on disk, right?
No, we can just we can create an artifact bundle, basically, an artifact bundle custom resource definition, and then the status would include the same fields as any other source type has, and then we can just combine all the artifacts that are linked, repackage them, and advertise them in the artifact bundle status, and then we can move to we can create artifacts as a separate kind of object type later on, so that we can start with introducing artifact bundles early on, and then later look into the more advanced scenarios to have a series of artifacts available for a Git repository or whatever. That would be a two-stage approach to solve the problem.
Yeah, I mean, if ideally we could get to a state where you could do Flux get artifacts minus source my repo, and it will say, okay, here are 10 artifacts corresponding to, I don't know, a branch, this commit, this semver, whatever, and then you can switch between them and say, oh, I want this artifact to go on that cluster and so on, right? Yeah, also for the pull request handling, that will help a lot.
Yeah, I think basically having, even if it's just a small series of versions basically available in a cluster, can help people a lot, especially because we want people to build on top of our controllers. I can think of a dozen use cases where you don't want to have just the latest artifact, but also the previous revision. Even if you want to do diffs, for example. Say you want to diff between what's going to be applied and the previous cluster. They need two versions, which we don't have at the moment because we replaced them.
Yeah. I mean, what people are doing right now, they are creating a Git repo with branch and SHA. And this is basically an artifact custom resource in the end, because it's like Git repo equals an artifact that will never change because you specified the SHA there. And if you want different SHAs inside your cluster, you are forced into creating a Git repo object per SHA, right? So that's the only way you can have multiple versions of the same thing inside your cluster. And that's a hack, basically, because we have the SHA there and we allow that, but we should have some construct around versions that are reusing the same Git repo and don't have to duplicate everything.
Yeah, but let's leave that to another PR then. The separate custom resource.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so
Great.
Philip, to recap, let's drop the cross namespace reference and
Yeah.
make it local, and let's not look at the kind. The kind is Git repository. You cannot specify, you cannot mix Helm repos, S3 buckets, and Git repos. It's only Git repo to Git repo. Create that as an alternative to submodules, and then yeah, document the bundles idea better.
Sounds good.
Oh, one more thing to discuss is let's give a short update where we are with K status. So we want our custom resources to be conformant with K status. Right now they are half conformant. For example, if let's say a Git repo fails to reconcile, maybe you specify the branch that doesn't exist. If you use K status to determine the reconciliation state, K status, even if the Git repo fails and ready is false, K status will not take that into account, and it will not say, hey, that reconciliation failed unless the timeout expires. So you can use K status with all the Flux custom resources, but you have to wait for the timeout. In order to improve this situation, we have to introduce two new conditions. The one that reports to K status the failure condition is called stalled. And the one that tells K status, hey, something is still happening is called reconciling, I think, Hide, or yeah, something like that.
Still reconciling, yeah.
Yeah.
It's what we historically called progressing as a reason in our own.
Yeah. So what we plan to do is add these two conditions on top of what we have already today. So it is not a breaking change to the Flux CLI or any other custom controller that integrates with us today. The ready condition will still be there. It still serves its purpose, but we are trying to reflect the ready condition into these two conditions that K status wants. And we plan to do that before the next release, which will not come next week, probably in 2 weeks for now, because we are taking some time off, and we also need to do some refactoring, so we don't add these two conditions manually to each controller and so on. The plan is for Hide to encapsulate this logic in a Flux package, in the runtime package, or Meta API. API is Meta.
Runtime package will be.
The runtime package. Okay, and
There, I can give a short explanation for what I'm doing. I'm basically creating two packages that can that are based on a lot of knowledge that the cluster API has. The cluster API from Kubernetes SIG is developed by a lot of people who also work on the controller runtime libraries itself. So it has a lot of good practices. And based on that, I'm creating two packages, one to control conditions and to be able to summarize an end state for a custom resource based on a list of conditions set on the object. So for example, it can calculate if an object is ready or not based on the configuration you give it and the current condition types that are set on the object, so that you never have to manually, and that's really tricky in some of our current controllers, set the ready state or figure out when you need to set something. Another thing that's capable to do is mirroring the ready conditions of depending objects. So say, for example, you have a Helm chart object that depends on a Git repository object, and you can basically configure the condition helper to say like, okay, always mirror the ready status from the Git repository on the Helm chart in a separate condition, so that it's easier for users to see why something is stuck. Because a lot of times we need, at the moment, we help users and then they haven't figured out that something is wrong, going wrong further down the line, basically, which will further help that. And another thing it can do, at the moment we do status patches based on, they're simply getting the API, the latest object from the API, and then applying our changes to top of that. And that can be tricky in some scenarios, because you can accidentally validate changes that have been done by others, and then result in a mixed up state. The patch helper I'm working on is also better capable of dealing with that by taking a snapshot of the object at the beginning of the reconciliation, and then calculating the changes made to that object at the end of the reconciliation loop before patching the object that is received from the API server. So you always only have a patch with the changes that were applied during the reconciliation, without server-side changes throwing, making a mess out of it or whatever. Anyhow, it's quite a lot of work. I'm working on finishing the test right now and making sure that all the case status logic is accurate, because it's kind of tricky, because case status, the new types we're introducing are abnormal true types, which is the preferred way of reporting conditions these days, while none of the Kubernetes native controllers does it at the moment. Anyway, they're only set if something goes wrong, while historically seen, most of our conditions are always set, and they're either true or false, but abnormal true conditions only appear if something goes wrong. So reconciling true means that the object is being reconciled and it's special, and at the moment it's done, it's removed. But that makes, for example, summarizing changes a bit different, because you need to give some condition types a special status to make them appear higher up in the list, which is true types. So anyhow, lots of changes ahead, lots of work also, but it will hopefully be for the better, and also result in, well, hopefully better, easier to read reconciler logic, because of some of our logic in reconcilers is really spaghetti-like, and that will be a lot easier with the helpers, because you're just setting things while you have confirmed something, instead of calculating the whole condition you want to push.
So when we patch the status sub-resource at the end of our reconciliation, can we just send the original object ID and only the metadata, so we don't have to post back the spec?
No, what it does, what you basically do is you initialize a helper at the beginning of your reconciliation, which you give the object that you just received from the API server, and then the whole reconciler works with a pointer to the object. So instead of what we're doing right now is that we are copying over the object all the time, and then create a pointer out of it and submit it to the API server. The helper creates a snapshot of your pointer object at the beginning of the reconciliation. You then make changes to the pointer object. So you make changes directly to the object and are no longer copying things all over the place. And then at the end, based on the snapshot it took from the beginning of the reconciliation and the end state of your object at the end of the reconciliation, it will calculate the patch, and that will be used to send an update to the Kubernetes API server. You get the point now? Yeah.
And that will result in a conflict, right? Because you'll be sending an old generation ID, let's say, while you are doing the
No, because it's capable of resolving conflicts.
What?
It's capable of resolving those conflicts to a certain extent.
Oh, okay. So it does a
So
three-way.
what it does is it calculates the patch, then it fetches a new object from the server, so the current state at that moment, and then it tries to apply the patch without taking the whole generation in mind. It just tries to see like, hey, this has changed within the reconciliation. Can I still apply it on top of this resource I have right now? Like, aren't there any conflicts with I don't know, spec changes, for example, are ignored. So
Okay.
if something has changed in the spec, and you want to push a status update, then it doesn't matter. What you can also say is like, oh, I see that there are conflicts in the conditions, but you can configure that you're the owner of certain condition types, and then it will just
We can
force
override
override them. Yes. So that
Yeah,
means that
So my concern was we start the reconciliation, then someone changes the spec in Git, customized controller will apply it, and let's say
it's
it's
ignored.
an image automation object, and it will write to Git, but then it will fail to write the status because the spec changed and there is a conflict. But if we always ignore the spec, then we don't have that issue. People
We
can
only take the spec into account basically if you make changes to the spec. So
but never do that.
we never do that. No, we don't. But this is all derived from work from Cluster API, which does that because they do modifications to resources in another cluster.
Okay.
But a lot of all the logic was sound. So it's just like, oh, okay, I'm going to use this because it has been proven. It's fully covered with tests. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel on this subject because it's just the best way to do it. So yeah, I hope that also removes some of the concerns Michael had about our status patching at present.
Cool.
I had
Yes.
one more agenda item. There was a question about how to run the new website locally on macOS, and I have an easy way. I don't know if we want to make this the supported way or the suggested way, but the problem is that there are options passed to grep or something that they're different on macOS, and
Yeah.
so we could remediate that in the make file and try to walk the line between what options you can use on Mac grep, and I don't want to do that personally. So my preference is to run a Linux container. That tool is Octito CLI, that it makes it appear like things are running locally, but they're running in the container basically. And it's really easy. You add one file to your repo that configures it. It's octito.yaml. I'm actually saying it wrong. I think it's Octeto, but
Never heard of it.
it's a great tool for especially anything that uses hot code reloading, like the website. This is the use case for it.
Great.
I
Can
post
you also run it on Windows?
Windows, Mac, and Linux. Yep.
Okay, so that's what we need. I mean,
The only requirement is you have to have a Kubernetes cluster, but it's really relaxed about what it needs to do. You can optionally enable or disable persistent volumes if you have something that's expensive to calculate, like if it was not Hugo, if Hugo takes 15/10 of a second to re-render the entire website. So it's not really a big deal to keep a local persistent cache, but it does that too. If you have like make targets or something that are going to spin for a while, you don't want to do it again every time you start up a new one. So if you want, I can make a docs PR how to run the website.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I really want for, I don't know, people that are running on Windows to be able to contribute to docs and preview them locally. Of course, macOS users as well. But if we, let's say, figure out what grep thing and what set thing has to be transformed for macOS, we'll still have the Windows problem. It will never work on Windows. So If your solution works everywhere, that's what we are after.
They
Sounds
send me
great.
a coffee mug, so this is a paid endorsement.
You're a fan. Yeah, super. I pasted a link to the issue. It's basically we inherited from a Kubernetes website, and it looks like it doesn't play well with Macs or Windows for that matter.
Yeah, but the Kubernetes website can be run in a container, right? That's how they.
Yes.
Because it's dubious to say, hey, you have to have a Linux desktop if you want to contribute to docs. That's not good.
Everyone should.
Yes.
Just go
Yeah,
ahead and install. No
We
problem.
are on the recording, so I'll not react to that.
Okay. Moving on. Was there anything else you were hoping to discuss at this meeting? We have Dan and Max on the call. Were you just listening in, or no, nothing from your end?
Nothing for me. Thanks.
What a luxury to be able to sit outside and work, by the way.
Good. Look,
With a baby crying behind me.
You flee the house.
all right. Thanks a lot, everyone, for the meeting, and see you next week again.
Sure.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.